All right, everyone. There's an interesting bit with Jesse Waters here. Link in the description, archived, of course. You can take the live link if you want to watch the video itself. Jesse Waters positing it's time to get the youth into populism. Donald Trump and Elon Musk the other day sat down for an interview, and they were talking about this. And Trump mentioned, sort of off the cuff, the youth there are a lot of talented people among them. I think that sometimes people on the right wing of politics, of which I'm not technically part of, they underestimate the youth. They think that the youth is bad and wrong, and that there's something wrong with them. Didn't we get judged the same way by older generations when we were young? I mean, I'm 37 now, so it's basically the same thing. Gen X, same thing. The boomers, same thing. Every generation gets judged by the older generations with regards to at least modern generations. The only one that doesn't is ironically the one that's part of the gerontocracy, the so-called greatest generation, like the World War IIers. The boomers were considered lazy, they have everything, they're decadent. The Gen Xers considered lazy and obsessed with electronics. The millennials get judged as being into drugs and freewheeling and stuff like that. And then Gen Z gets a bad rap from the Gen Xers and the millennials of today, even though they don't really deserve it. I've seen a lot of based people among Gen Z. At this point, Generation Alpha is rising, and the same thing will happen to them. Older generations necessarily, of necessity, will judge them as well. And I never really understood this because I'm like, I can remember like the rise of the early wave of the internet, and millennial subculture, and we were always getting called, weird shit by all of these old fogies, so to speak. And I'm thinking to myself, it doesn't really make sense. Some people break the mold. Most people will fall into lockstep with that generational hegemony. Some people will break the mold. It is, again, of necessity that that will happen. The kids are all right. Don't worry too much. Not every Gen Zer is woke and has pink hair and puts the transgender flag on their Twitter account. That's not the way that it works. I've never really understood the intergenerational warfare sort of thing. As a core millennial, I've never really understood it. Now I'm approaching 40, so I am young-ish, but I'm no longer young, and I admit to that fact. The kids will be fine. What we need to do is try to get the younger generation interested in populism, libertarianism, things like that. Thankfully, it seems that with Gen Z, they're really more with it than the goddamn millennials. Like my generation, which we were young 10 years ago, we're the ones that became the idiot liberals for the most part. And you've got a good song by Vampire Weekend called Gen X Cops. You should watch that if you want to see my opinion on that generation. Um, the millennials are the ones that sold out. When I was young, when I was in college, I'm like fucking 22 or something. I had great hopes for my generation. I thought that we would stop the war. I thought that we would stop the famine. I thought that we would stop the purge in Darfur. I thought that we would stop all of the problems of the world. I figured, hey, we're the ones that are going to do it. We failed. It's time to admit to that fact and say, hopefully, the next generation doesn't fail. That's really what we need to do. We need to promulgate the ideas of populism and libertarianism among the youth. If you don't, the communists are already targeting the youth. They do this all of the time. They understand if you can grab somebody's mind when they're a teenager or in their early 20s or something like that, then you've got them for life, ideologically. We need to take up the same tactic. Now, I am not a conservative. Um, in many ways, I actually lean towards the left on certain issues, but this is because of the football team mentality that is promulgated in the United States. It's really an us versus them sort of system. It's similar to Europe, where it's us versus them, and them with that group associated with us, and it's a little bit different, but it doesn't matter. In the United States, you effectively have two political parties. That doesn't mean you just have two political ideologies, but they tend to be broad tent. If you can therefore target the youth, and I don't mean target as in like, propagandizing to them, I mean like trying to convince them to win them over to your side, then you prevail. If you don't do this, if you're basically a party of 80-year-olds, it's going to be a little bit difficult now, isn't it? And both parties have stubbornly refused to do youth outreach. For the most part, you have a bunch of influencer activists that are trying to do that. You have people like Scott Pressler on one end, people that I consider very virtuous. And then you have people on the other end, like the Harry Sissons that are paid by the DNC, trying to countermand that on the other end. It looks like the vaguely conservative movement, which has become more populistic, is winning out. That's the good news. The bad news is that there's no centralized, coordinated effort to try to convince people why they should be more on that side. But there is a concerted effort by people that are more uniparty slash liberal to do the same thing, and it's paid for. A lot of these people, they literally get checks from sub DNC donors and things like that. I do not want a country in which everything falls to shit because we relapse into Bidenomic unipartyism. I want a country in which people can be free and do the things that they want to do. That's literally all I want. Like, look at me. I mean, do I look like a do I look like a uniparty liberal or something like that? That's basically my point. And so I agree with Jesse Waters. I agree with Donald Trump. What we need to be doing is trying to instill in people that are very young the concept that you can do what you want. That's the whole point of this entire nation. We were founded on the concept of rugged individualism. Now, it's no longer rugged because, the land has been tamed and things like that, but still individualism. The idea that a person can be who they are and be accepted for that, or at least not abused for what they're doing. If you're offering nobody else any insult, if you're not violating anyone else's rights, you should effectively be able to do what you want. This is where I fall on the left in some cases. I do not care if you're gay. I literally couldn't give less of a shit. I do not care if you do drugs. If you're on your own property and there's no small children around, if you want to smoke crack, I don't give a shit about that either. This is where I depart from the standard conservative model because some of them do give a shit. This is the way that we were meant to live. Our founders, they were drunk all the goddamn time. They were smoking everything under the sun. They smoked datura and stuff like that. They used drugs that are way harder than some of the shit that's generally used today. And they had guns all over the place. They probably had a musket in every room. This was considered conceivably normal. It was considered perfectly acceptable. They had slavery, but that's a different issue. That particular debate almost ripped our country apart. Other than the slave debate, though, they were pretty lockstep in believing that a person should be generally left alone. That is, that if they're not offering anyone else harm or insult, other than occasional pistol duels and stuff like that, they should be left alone. They should be allowed to do what they want. It's as simple as, my man. That was the whole point. And thankfully, it looks like the youth generally gets this idea. Gen Z has departed from the machinations of us millennials. Some of us have broken the mold. You can look at me for an example. But many millennials have sort of fallen in line with the police state mentality and shit like that and go along with the system, even though the system clearly doesn't work. It behooves us, therefore, to appeal to the youngest generations, the Gen Z and Gen Alpha at this point, and I think the Generation Beta is now being born, which is hysterical. I can't wait to troll them. It behooves us to do outreach to them in order to appeal them to populism and to liberty and things like that. We need a civic revival. I think now that our nation is going to hit its 250th birthday, I think that'll be helpful. There's a reason why Donald Trump is doing a star-studded sort of, year-long event with regards to that. There's a reason for that. And it's wise of him to do so. Musk is on board with this too. He's like that nerdy kid, that you knew in school, which would have been me if you were in the same school as me. The one with the video scope and stuff like that, who gets a cut and immediately puts the blood on a slide and then looks at their own their own blood cells and stuff like that under a microscope. And when they're partnered together, when they're teamed up, it's very, very difficult for anyone to defeat them. I'm very, very happy about this. So yeah, don't worry about the kids. They're all right. Gen Z will probably exceed the millennials with regards to advancing liberty, advancing populism, etc. That's about all. Peace out.